Hello，你好，欢迎回来，Welcome back to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger on May 5th, 2021. As promised, we are rounding off our little criminal and law and order series this week. And I mentioned last week we are going to talk about uh, the date of the execution this episode. So as I mentioned, I'm going to try to keep this as non-violent, as non-gruesome as possible, because that is not what this channel is about. I think if you want the violent stuff, then you can just watch Tactical Tuesday or Survival Saturday, or go Google some of the worst execution or most brutal executions or tortures in human history on YouTube. And there already been a lot of good videos done on those topics. But execution is not just about killing somebody, especially in Chinese culture. There has been a lot of ceremonies, a lot of rules and restrictions around it. And I think some of that is actually quite interesting, having a historical value. Uh, so it's worth talking about it. So, with that said, obviously we are talking about chopping off people's head. We are talking about the death of a thousand cut. So some gruesome details cannot be avoided if I want to keep the flow of the narration. So if that kind of stuff will disturb you or turn your stomach, then I suggest this is a good time to slip past this episode and come back next episode. Uh, you're not going to miss out on the equation of life or the secret of the universe by skipping an episode that is based on ancient Chinese customs and ceremonies around execution. But of course, since I'm spending time making this episode, I hope that you will stay and listen to some of these little tidbits of information that I personally find to be quite interesting. So, last episode we already talked about the several different kinds of execution that can be carried out, that can be sent, the person can be sentenced to. So there is a guaxin. The guaxin means to cut slowly, to slice slowly. That's a death by a thousand cuts. And then there's the jiaoxin, which is usually reserved for high-ranking officials or women. This is when you are allowed to hang yourself. If you don't hang yourself, they will take you out and strangle you. But yeah, uh, they will give you a chance to hang yourself in your jail cell or in your room, depending on where you are in prison. And then the most popular, the most common is the 斩刑, 斩立决, which is the beheading, the decapitation, cutting off your head. You go chop chop. Now, here's something that's quite interesting. I don't know if you guys have ever wondered why is it that Chinese people love chopping off head? I mean, other cultures do too, but I can't speak for why they do it. I mean, obviously, chopping off the head is a sure way to kill somebody, but when you really think about it, that's an awful lot of work. Like, I'm sure most of us never tried it before. I never tried it before, but I have worked with swords and axes for a long time. And I can tell you that even if it's a like thin wooden stick, like as thick as a broomstick, and if I let it sit there in a bucket, okay, and I give you a sword or give you an axe, I said go ahead, chop off the top one third or top quarter of it with one stroke. That is hard. Like you will have to be really really good at it to be able to do that cut without knocking the bucket and the whole thing over. Most of the time, what's going to happen is you might cut through half of it, or you might cut through a quarter of it, and then your blade gets stuck, and then you end up knocking the broomstick and the bucket over. So this is really difficult. When you talk about a human, and if it's like a small human, that's easier. But if you're talking about someone who have like a really big neck, like me, okay, this would be hard. This neck, I'm not boasting, but this neck would be hard. Um, so when you think about it, why chop off head? I mean, a spear in the skull, a spear in the throat, a spear through the heart would work just as well. An arrow through the heart would work just as well. Heck, take a dagger and just stab it through the eye would work just as well. The person would still be dead. So why chop off the head? Like I said, I can't speak for other cultures, but for Chinese culture, I have learned that it's all about religion. It's about superstition. Chinese people believe that when you kill somebody, when someone dies in a violent manner, that person's spirit is bound to this earth. It cannot reincarnate until it is no longer angry. So it becomes a hungry ghost, an angry ghost. And this ghost is going to come back and exact vengeance on you or your family members. And so when you kill somebody, especially in the old days, when you kill somebody, uh, you have to think about what happened a month later when this spirit come back. Either as a unseen evil force, your kitchen utensils start flying off the shelf and try to kill you, or maybe the corpse just suddenly stand up and start hunting you like a zombie. Right? What are you going to do? So people back then decided that, well, if we chop off the head, this ghost, even when they come back, they won't have eyes to see with, they won't have ears to hear with, they don't have brain to think with. So you take away all the important things from this ghost. So this ghost might look for you, might try to haunt you, but it's not going to be very effective because it can't see, it can't hear, it can't make noise, it can't think. So that is why they chopped off the head in Chinese culture, uh, in execution, in a lot of the, I hate to say this, but there's a lot of Chinese murders that after they murder someone, they will go out of their way to chop off the head and bury the head elsewhere, away from the body. Right? This is why. This is why executioners, murderers, they will do something like this. It's all to stop the vengeance of the ghost afterward. So once a person is sentenced to be executed, he or she will stay in their cell. Uh, this is assuming that the sentence wasn't the first type, which is 斩立决. 斩立决 is kill you now, take you outside, chop off your head. Now you're so evil, we don't want to keep you around. Now, like I mentioned in the last episode, most of the people that get sentenced to have their head chopped off were sentenced to 秋后问斩 or 秋决. Uh, 秋决 means autumn execution. So they wait until around Halloween. They wait until around Thanksgiving, uh, around the time of the harvest, and then they take all the criminals that's been waiting around out there, and then they uh, execute you one after the other. They get it all done in one day. Right? So in those cases, you're kept in your cell. They'll feed you. They'll give you water. Um, Now, the condition obviously was not always very good. It all depends on, again, how much your family is willing to bribe the prison guard for you. If the family is willing to bribe them really well, then you will get good meal, you'll get good treatment. You may even get them to sneak some women in there for you to enjoy, or men, if that is your thing, whatever. So, depending on how much bribe is given, that really makes a difference to your treatment while you are waiting for your execution. The night before the execution, the prison guard will show up with a jug of wine, a bowl of rice, and a big chunk of meat. This is the last meal, the last rite, the last meal. Now, this is where this is another instance where you really see how money-driven Chinese people have always been, how greedy, how amorous the Chinese people has always been when it comes to money. Typically, now this changes depending on the dynasty, the government, but most typically, for every last meal, for every prisoner, the magistrate was given 5 grams of gold to spend on the prisoner's last meal because the emperor they wanted good karma. They didn't want bad karma. So they believed that by sending the condemned off to with a good meal, at least they won't be a hungry ghost. At least they won't die angry and hungry and unsatisfied. Uh, they'll be easier to deal with, and there will be better karma afterward. So the emperor will usually give 5 grams of gold to the magistrate for every prisoner that needs the last meal. So George is to be executed tomorrow. So today, here is 5 grams of gold, and please give him a good meal. Now, when we really think about the psychology of waiting to die, it's got to be one of the most torturous things in the world. Dying itself is not scary. Death itself is not scary. If, let's say, you're on the battlefield and suddenly an arrow comes out of left field and hit you in the head and you die, yeah, okay, you didn't even see it coming. So it's not scary. Uh, if you go out and suddenly an airplane fall on top of you and you die, that is not scary because you didn't know it was going to happen. But when someone bring you your last meal and say, "Hey, enjoy. We are chopping off your head 5 in the morning." Now that is scary. It's almost certain that you will not be able to eat a lot. Almost certain that you won't be able to even sleep tonight. You'll spend the rest of your time worrying, scared, thinking what's going to happen. Is it going to hurt when I chop off my head? You're going to be scared. So most prisoners, even if you spend the 5 grams of gold to get them that super good meal. And let's put it in context here. 5 grams of gold back then was equivalent to about 9 months of wages for a normal citizen. So let's say you make $2,000 a month in today's standard. Let's say you make $2,000 a month, and that is like minimum wages, for most people. That 5 grams of gold is about equivalent to $18,000. Now just sit and think about it for a second. $18,000. What kind of meal can you get for $18,000? Like you can probably buy up the entire restaurant, uh, every item on the menu 10 times. You can get enough food for the entire neighborhood with that kind of money. Okay, so obviously the condemned, even if they were in a really good mood, would never be able to eat that much. So it became a general practice that the magistrate said, well, no point wasting all that food on them. They're not going to eat it. So give them their wine, their rice, their piece of meat. They don't need vegetable, and they're going to die tomorrow. They don't have to worry about vitamin. They don't have to worry about fiber. You know? And how much would that cost? That would probably cost like uh, 10 coppers, which is like a hundred, uh, like so 1 ounce of gold was about 100 silver, and one silver is about 100 copper. So you do the math. So they get 5 ounces of gold to get food for the condemned, but they spend only about 10 copper worth actually on the condemned. The rest going to the magistrate pocket. So giving the condemned last meal became super profitable for the magistrate. Right? A regular magistrate maybe only make uh, 1 ounce of gold a month, if that. But when someone is to be executed, suddenly they get the emperor sent over 5 ounces of gold, and most of that going to their own pocket. But this is why it created a kind of a situation where magistrates were very happy to sentence someone to death because they could get really rich by doing so. Now, of course, here is where a lot of us would be thinking, well, that seems like a big problem. So, what happens if the magistrate just start sentencing people to death indiscriminately just so they can get rich? Well, it did happen sometime, but there was a fail-safe on this because anyone who was sentenced to be executed, if they had the family member, if they had people that would be willing to make the trip for them. Let's say if George is sentenced to be executed in the autumn, and let's say George's brother decided that his George was innocent. Now George's brother can travel to the higher level. So let's say George was sentenced by the town of Richmond, where I live, the city of Richmond. Well, if George's brother thinks that George is innocent, that he shouldn't be sentenced to death, George's brother can then travel to the provincial government, wherever the provincial government is, and then talk to the magistrate there, because the magistrate there is like the Supreme Court versus the local jurisdiction. Now, if the Supreme Court takes an interest in the case, and the Supreme Court finds out that, hey, the magistrate of Richmond has been executing people wrongly and uh, uh, killing people uh, uh, left, right, and center when they don't deserve to die. It's not like today. Today, if they find out that, hey, well, there's a judge that's been sentencing people to the wrong thing, well, the most thing that's going to happen to that judge is go to jail. The most thing that's going to happen to that judge is that judge will lose their post and not unable to be a judge again. But for the most part, uh, they probably don't even go to jail. No? They they probably just get have to pay millions of dollars of fine, and then they get to retire early. Back then, that's not the case. Back then, I don't know if you guys remember me mentioning in the last episode. For government officials, for politicians, one of the forms of execution uh, was 诛, J-U, 诛. This was never used on commoners for the most part. This was always reserved for the officers and magistrates and politicians. The Zhu type of execution was that you have offended the government, you have offended your king, your emperor so much, they will order for you and your entire family and any distant relatives to be executed. So if you are a magistrate that have been uh, sentencing people to death when they shouldn't be, and you get found out, that is what's going to happen to you. Not just you, but any family member, any relative going to get executed. Your entire family wiped off the face of the earth like a genocide. It's just that serious. So when we sit here and think, well, why didn't you, if they could make that much money, why didn't they just do it more often? Well, because it's a really big risk. Would you really want to uh, get your whole family wiped off by the emperor uh, if you get caught? Like that is a big gamble. I mean, like I said, there were people that did it, but for the most part, they didn't come to any kind of good ending because sooner or later you are going to run into that one person who have the family resources, a family connection that's going to go up to the Supreme Court and say, hey, something's going on here. This magistrate in Richmond has been chopping off heads and making a lot of money. Can you guys investigate? So sooner or later, you're going to run into someone who's going to do that. And then where are you going to be? You're going to get your whole family executed. So it was there was a failsafe in this system as well. On the day of the execution, everyone get up early. Everyone get up early. The magistrate and the executioner, the prison guard, the escorts, everyone out of bed by 3 o'clock in the morning before the sunrise. They open the Tiger Gate of the imperial courtroom because that is the gate that the prisoner has to be escorted out of on the way to the execution ground. There was a very big art, a big ceremony in escorting the prisoner, the condemned, out of the jail cell, out of the jail complex, the prison complex. Uh, it would take two or three prison guard. They will come into the George's cell, or just so called the condemned George. The guards will come into George's cell and say the first thing they have to say is, "Congratulations, you are freed today. Congratulations, you are freed today." This may sound like sarcasm, but it's not. Right? You are freed from the trouble that you've been in. You will be freed from worrying. You'll be freed from this mortal coil. Congratulations, your torment is over today. It was a genuine well wish. Uh, Basically, the prison guard, what they're saying is, uh, we know that you have had a rough time. Maybe you have not been treated very well here in jail. But we are all just here to work. We're just all working people and doing our job. So hopefully, uh, now that you're freed from this torture, now that you're free, you will not hold a grudge. Please remember us fondly, or don't remember us at all. But don't hold a grudge. Don't come back and haunt us afterwards. Okay? Congratulations, you are freed today. And then they will pick George up. George is not allowed to walk from the jail cell uh, to the courtroom. George is not allowed to walk from the jail cell to the courtroom. Uh, why? Because if George was sentenced to be executed, everybody in the town, everybody in the neighboring town knew about it. This was a big thing. They didn't just do it in secret, right? Uh, we are assuming that George is some kind of really horrendous, really serious offender, big rapist or killer or serial killer, something like that. So people wanted to know if when George was going to be executed, where, how, so people could watch. People back then loved watching that stuff. It was like a um, family outing, like a family occasion for some people. The entire family get together, get up early, make prepare their food, and grab their picnic basket and go sit around the execution ground just to wait for this to happen. This was a really big deal back then. So imagine this. Imagine if you let everyone know that George was to be executed on May 5th, and then suddenly George, while walking from the jail cell to the courtroom, fall down the stairs and break his neck. Uh-oh. And now, what are you going to tell people now? Now you're going to have a riot. People that been looking forward to this day, now they're disappointed. Now it makes the emperor look bad. And you do not want to make the emperor look bad. You make the emperor look bad, the emperor chop off your head. So it's very serious business. When you tell people George have to be executed on this day, you need to do your best to make sure that George, like a superstar, has to appear in front of people, have to be executed on this day. So nothing is allowed to happen to George on the way between the jail cell and the courtroom. So the guardsmen, the prison guard, pick George up, one on each side and one in front, one in the back, make sure that George is not going to suddenly slam his head into the wall or trip down the stairs uh, or try to escape. They carry George up to the gate of the prison complex, and then there they will exchange with the escort, the I guess you can call them bailiff, the court guard. So when the prison guard hand George over to the court guard, again, George's feet not allowed to touch the ground. The whole exchange have to be done by me holding this person in the air, handing this person over to you. You take a hold of the person, and the prison guard at this point have to say given, and the court guard, the escort, said taken. Once the phrases were acknowledged, once the prison guard said given, and the court guard, the bailiff, said, "Taken." At this point on, if anything happened to George, it's not the prison guard's irresponsibility. From this point on, anything happened to George, the court guard is responsible. So from here, the court guard, again, not George is not allowed to walk, carry George in the air up the stairs into the courtroom, and then they'll make sure that they put George down, but there's one person behind George holding onto his collar or the back of his restraint. Okay, make sure again. You got to make sure he doesn't commit suicide. He doesn't run away. The one person standing behind George, while George is kneeling on the floor in the courtroom. This is when the magistrate will present George with the final document. George, you have been found guilty by this court. You were uh, condemned to you were found guilty of murdering blah blah blah, and you did this, and here is the document with your handprint on it, your confession. And today you are going to be freed from your mortal coil by serving your sentence, uh, and blah blah blah. Do you understand and acknowledge this decision? Do you understand and acknowledge this decision? And then they present the document, and George have to sign, and before the execution can proceed. So this document, this final document, have to have the magistrate's own signature and George's signature. Then it needs to be two, and this is kept for a record. This is kept for record just in case if 2 years later someone go to the imperial court or go to the Supreme Court and said they executed George wrongfully. Now the Supreme Court is going to want to see this document and all the related documents to make sure that everything was in order. So this is a very important document. But this is another instance where they kind of went through a little bit of a loophole because most condemned, especially back then, were not educated. They didn't know how to write their own name. So when the document is presented to them, and at this point, they're so scared, they're so worried because they're going to die pretty soon. Their hands shaking, they're unable to write properly. So to prevent that there might be some kind of argument later that said the condemned was didn't sign, this was not their signature, the bailiff, the guy that's standing behind George, making sure that George is not going to run away or break his neck on the stairs, uh, he will sign for George. This is one of those things where everyone knew George didn't sign, but most people just pretend they didn't see it. The bailiff will take up the pen or the quill back then and sign for George. And then the document is given back to the magistrate, and then the magistrate will sign the final signature. Okay, after the signature, take him out and execute him. This is where another interesting little custom happened. After the magistrate signed the death sentence, he is going to throw that quill. He's going to like just toss it. He doesn't put it in a garbage can. He doesn't put it away. He just hold it up and throw it as hard as he could. And all the guards, all the people in the court would scatter. Okay, you can't let that touch you when it's falling, when it's falling out of the air. If that quill was to touch you while it's dropping, it's extreme bad luck. It means that pretty soon you or someone in your family will suffer the same fate as George. So everyone scattered, like get out of the way when the magistrate chucked that quill across the room. But as soon as that quill hit the floor, everyone ran forward trying to retrieve it. And whoever end up with that quill will take that home, will take that quill home and give it to their children for their children to use in school. Because it was said that if your children can write with the quill that has once carried out justice, the quill that has once carried out justice, then your children will grow up to be a magistrate. That was a big deal. So a lot of people wanted a quill like that. So remember, you don't want it to touch you on its way down. But as soon as it hit the floor, you want to dive down to get it. It's like everyone rush forward to try to grab that like it's a hockey puck or a basketball or a football. It's like everyone want to be the person who got it. So that was a little bit of a funny uh, uh, thing that would happen in the imperial court in the old days when you see the guardsmen scattering and then rushing forward, tackling each other out of the way, trying to get that quill. Now, after everyone settled down and someone's got the quill and everyone else was disappointed, then now we can go back to regular business. Please pick George up and put him in the buggy. There was a buggy that they have with a cage on it, and they put George in the cage, load the load the cage on the buggy, and then they hitch the buggy up with horses, and then take George out to the execution ground to be executed. Now, up to this point, it's the general, what's happening before the execution, and of course, I already mentioned, once you get to the execution ground, there's a huge crowd there. Uh, Citizens are here to watch, and they're eagerly waiting to see someone's head getting chopped off. They're eagerly here to watch someone from getting the death by a thousand cuts. The death of a thousand cuts and the beheading were carried out in two separate execution grounds. Typically, every major city would have uh, two major marketplaces, one by the north gate, one by the south gate, or one by the east gate, one by the west gate. They're always opposing each other. So typically, if the the beheading is carried out by the north gate, the north market, then the guaxin, the death by a thousand cuts, is always carried out by the south market. So people could easily pick which one they wanted to go watch. Now, I already mentioned a little bit about the guaxin, how you can actually bribe the, uh, the guard, the executioner, uh, on how they perform this. And uh, when the executioner is performing the death by a thousand cuts, they have to judge that how much you can take, how much George can take. If the sentence was George has to die by a thousand cuts, but George bleed to death by cut number 800, uh-oh, well then the executioner is in trouble. Then the emperor, if the emperor was really angry, they can actually sentence the executioner to suffer the cuts that George didn't suffer. So George was supposed to suffer a thousand cuts, but he died by cut 800. Well, now we have to sentence the executioner to suffer the 200 cuts. It was that serious. So the executioner who carried out the cut by a thousand cuts, death by a thousand cuts, have to be very, very good at reading judging how much a person could take. If by cut number 100 they decide, okay, George is uh, has had enough. George is going to cardiac arrest if he keeps this up. Take him back to the jail cell and we continue tomorrow. And this may go on for days. Okay, so that is basically the death by a thousand cuts. Back then, if George was um, if George was from a really influential family, sometimes the family would give the executioner a big enough bribe that the executioner can then bribe the doctor, the physician on site, and all the people involved to be more oblivious. So what would happen is rather than torturing George with all 1,000 cuts before he died, the executioner will try to kill George covertly with a poisoned dagger on cut number one. And after cut number one, George is already dead, but since it's poison, so a lot of people who are watching wouldn't really know. The executioner can then go on with the rest of the cuts and pretend that George is still alive. So there were a lot of loopholes that people could go through to make this a lot more tolerable. But it was still a very, very gruesome, very brutal way to kill somebody. Now, the other form, the more common form, the chopping off the head, the beheading. First, let's talk about the sword they use for beheading, for decapitation. In European culture, you have the guillotine or the axe. In Chinese culture, there's actually a specific sword called 鬼头刀, translation ghost head sword, ghost head sword, 鬼头刀, used for execution, for beheading. This is a really big single-edged broadsword without a point in the front. The front is very thick and heavy, almost has a hammerhead configuration, uh, and there's no point, no sharp point in the front. It's flat or rounded off in the front. This is so this weapon will be extremely front heavy. So when you swing it, it actually feels a lot like an axe. A 鬼头刀 was specifically reserved for beheading. This was a tool. This was not a weapon. No one ever used 鬼头刀 for combat, despite of what we see sometimes in video games or Chinese novels, where some warriors would wield a 鬼头刀 in combat. No, in historical fact, 鬼头刀 were never used for combat. It didn't have a point. It's extremely front heavy. It's not a good weapon. It's good for only one thing, to chop things, to chop off head. So it was a sword specifically made to fulfill that purpose. On days where the ghost head sword was not in service, it has to be worshipped. It has to be carefully kept and polished. This was like a instrument of ceremony. You don't just take it home and hang it on the wall. In fact, there was a very specific place that they would keep the ghost head sword. On the side of every city gate, especially the main gate of the city, there would be a tower, a watchtower, where sentries can spot incoming enemy and screen people coming in and going out of the city. At the very top room of the tower, was where the ghost head sword was kept, and only the executioner could enter this room. And the executioner would go in there regularly to light incense, to pray to Buddha, to polish the ghost head sword, to try to uh, make sure that this weapon is taken care of. It's in the best condition. It's nice and sharp. And on the day of the executioner get up nice and early and get in their executioner's robe, make sure they take a bath, make sure they're nice and clean, make sure that they uh, say their prayer to the gods and Buddha, so the gods and Buddha will make sure that this bad karma will not come back on them. You can imagine that for a race of people that believe in karma, being an executioner was a kind of a serious stuff because you spend your life chopping off head, and that got to be a lot of bad karma. So executioners were extremely faithful, devoted religious people. They spend a lot of time in prayer. They spend a lot of time doing good deeds to uh, balance off all this evil karma they accumulate when they carry out their duty. And then once they are clean and they done their prayer, the executioner go up to the tower room and do another set of prayers, kneeling down in front of the ghost head sword before taking it up, carrying it very respectfully, and walk to the execution ground. This was all done in a very respectful, very ceremonial manner. Okay, so it's not like what you see in movies where like the executioner just like this big, hooded, sinister looking dude with an axe just standing there waiting to chop off head. No. In fact, most of the executioners back then they were uh, really highly respected elderly people. They were like, if you look at this historical depiction, a lot of the executioners they were like little old harmless-looking uh, guys. Either some of them might even be monks. Some of them might even be Buddhist monks or Taoist monks. These were really mild-mannered old men that will carry out the execution. To be an executioner back then was a lifelong profession. It was not something that you just do randomly. It's a burden that you take on, and then later on you pass it down to your son, and then your son passes it down to their son. It's a family career. Um, so executioners from a young age would start practicing, and I don't mean they practice by chopping off head, but what they would do if they would study anatomy. They it was said that every executioner owned a pet monkey. And no, they didn't just kill their pet monkey for practice. No, but what they would do, because monkeys are structurally similar to human, so they would spend a lot of time playing with their pet monkey. Especially, they would give their pet monkey massages, back massages. So they always can immediately, instantly judge where is the separation between the columns of your spine, where is the separation between the first joint, second joint, third joint. Immediately, when they look at the condemned, kneeling there with their head down, the executioner need to pick up that huge ghost head sword and strike at the precise point between the first joint and the second joint of the spinal column, at the point where the spine enters the skull. Because if you hit it too high, then the sword is going to get stuck in the skull. It might not even kill the condemned right away. It turns into a botched execution. It looks bad. And if you hit it too low, and if you hit it too low, then you get all the shoulder muscles and the neck muscles in there. So you got to hit it at the exact point where the spine enters the skull to sever the head cleanly with one strike, and the condemned will not suffer. This is very important. An executioner that botched an execution sometimes will get executed himself. This was serious business. Um, so this is why the ghost head sword was kept razor sharp at all times, and the executioner spent a lot of time playing with their pet monkey, giving the monkey massages, and always looking. Uh, it, I don't know if this part is true or not, but it was said that if you have a friend who's an executioner, they'll always ask to walk behind you when you hang out. If you're walking outside together, they always walk behind because they want the chance to study. They want to look at you and see, okay, wait, if I was to cut this person's head off, where would I uh, hit with the sword? Where would be the entry point? They take all the time they could to study people's back, study people's neck, so they can be very good at judging that entry point. And once the executioner was ready and the condemned was brought to the execution ground, the executioner will first have a chat with the condemned. Are you feeling okay? Are you scared? Don't be scared. I'm really good at what I do. You won't even feel a thing, I promise you. And please uh, be be relaxed and go into your next life and be a better person in your next life. You know that the at this point, the executioner's function serve as a priest, almost like he's here to listen to the last wish of the condemned, talk to them, calming them down to the best of their ability, teach them how to assume the proper pose. And this is very important too, because most of the condemned would be so scared, they may be shaking, or they may be jittery, they may be moving all over the place. So that makes the executioner's job a lot harder. The executioner would tell the condemned, keep your eyes on that plaque, okay? Kneel in this pose, kneel down. Make sure your back is straight. Make sure you're not hunched forward. Make sure your shoulders is relaxed. Your shoulders are relaxed. Shoulder down, chest up, head up. Look straight ahead, or close your eyes if you wish, but make sure you're relaxed. Okay? You won't feel a thing. I promise you. Because this way, it's a nice and still, upright target. If the condemned is like hunched forward with their head close to the ground, or the chin is tucked in, or if they're really scared, they might like curl up on the ground. Like that gets awkward, because now it's not a clear target. It's not a good cut. You will need to get guardsmen to pick them up and then try to force them into the proper position. And then the guardsmen obviously can't stand there. They have to let go and step back for you to carry out your beheading. So uh, it was an art all on its own. How to, for an executioner, how to study anatomy to make that cut perfect, how to take care of the ghost head sword to make sure the edge is perfect, the edge is perfectly sharp, how to swing that ghost head sword. I mean, we're talking about like a massive 7 pound, 6 or 7 pound sword. Uh, how to swing that and make the swing perfect. So of course, the executioner have to practice a lot of that swinging motion at home as well. Uh, and then they have to be good psychologists. They have to be able to calm the condemned down and teach them the proper position to assume, and then to carry out the execution as flawlessly as possible. Another interesting little tidbit, the last one we're going to share today, is beside the execution ground where beheading, where decapitation took place, there was always a shoe shop. That's a shoe store. And the reason for that is because a lot of family members, they'll want to uh, hire someone to sew the head back onto the corpse afterward for burial. And the best people that could do that was obviously people that was good at stitching leather and heavy duty stuff. So shoe store, people who made shoes and boots back then were usually expert for these. And this again was the time when a shoemaker could make a lot of money because it's usually rich people that could afford to buy the head and the corpse back from the imperial court for this kind of treatment to get it stitched back together. So a shoemaker normally might only make 30 or 40 coppers uh, a month, but if they get someone who's executed and need their head stitched back on, then that might take 20 or 30 silver right there. And that enough money that they don't need to make any shoes, repair any shoes for at least half a year. So shoemakers love this job. I love cases like this where the condemned needed their head sewn back on. There were a lot of other interesting little superstitions and trivia around various forms of execution, but I think that it's been a long enough episode, and it's been nice and hopefully educational and not overly gruesome. I will thank you all for checking out today's Wisdom Wednesday. We'll be back again tomorrow for Toy Thursday. For now, have a good day and 再见。